Thank you, and welcome. So tonight we're going to look at the human health and environmental impacts that are associated with the chemicals and the pathways of exposure from the development of shale oil and gas plays. So this is a map of the United States and a little portion of Canada and Mexico that shows you where the shale plays are. Up on the East Coast, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and New York, except New York has a moratorium, is the Marcellus and the Utica shale. Pennsylvania has high concentrations of wells producing large quantities from the Marcellus and the Utica, and that shale is a natural gas producing shale. Then you move down to Louisiana and you see the Haynesville shale. It's around the Shreveport area in northwest Louisiana, and it produces natural gas. And then you look at the Tuscaloosa shale, which goes across the state of Louisiana and into Mississippi, and it produces natural gas, crude oil, and condensate. We move into Texas. There are two major shale deposits in Texas. The Barnett around Fort Worth. Gas is produced out of the Barnett. And then the Eagle Ford, which is almost an identical twin to the Tuscaloosa, where we produce gas, oil, and condensate. And then if we move over to North Dakota, we have the Bakken shale, which produces natural gas, crude oil, and condensate. And it's the other one that matches a lot of what will be going on here. And then there's starting to be some shale developed in California, and then there's a lot in Wyoming. But these are the major shales that are being developed. And the Tuscaloosa is like at the tail end of developing, but because of what we know in the other areas, you will find out what it will be like here. So here it is across Louisiana and Mississippi, and you see down in the right-hand corner at the bottom where St. Tammany is located. And remember, natural gas, crude oil, and condensate is in this shale. The Tuscaloosa shale, as I said, recovers natural gas, condensate, and crude oil, and the reservoir is supposed to have producible 7 to 9 billion barrels. 7 to 9 billion barrels. So this is a location where a lot of the energy companies want to drill and want to produce. So you need to remember that. The plays range from 10,000 feet in depth along the northern part of the formation to 15,000 feet in depth along the southern part. And the company that's proposing the well is looking at 13,000 plus feet. There's some disagreement by other producers that they're looking too deep. Other wells in the Tuscaloosa are between 10,000 and 12,000 feet in depth, and Hellas is requiring 13,000 feet. Horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing are required to produce the crude oil, the natural gas, and the condensate in the Tuscaloosa trip. So now I want to show you what is involved and what the future holds for your community. Here is a well. They drilled the well down to 13,000 feet, and then they go over at an angle, or the horizontal portion, and it can go out 1, 2, or 3 miles. And then they produce fracking fluid that they force down there and force out of the well and fracture the formation, the shale formation, and then prop it over with sand and with ceramic beads. And because you prop it open, then the gas the crude oil, and the condensate can flow to the surface. So this is the first phase, drilling the well. Question is there public participation and is there public notification for the permit to drill the well? No. The company applies for the permit, it's granted by the Office of Conservation, and there is no public notification or public opportunity to comment. Then after you've gotten the well all the way down in the horizontal portion, you put in the fracking fluid and prop open that formation. These are two structures that are used for fracking. You will be very familiar with these on the landscape if it comes to your area. So you see the two well heads where the structures are over, and this is where they pump large quantities under high pressure down into the well formation. In order to do this, they need impoundments. They need impoundments to hold the fracked water that is used to add the chemicals to. They need impoundments to hold the drilling fluids that come back up, and they need the impoundments to hold the flowback water. And the flowback water is the frack fluids that go down, fracture the formation, and come back up. So we're not just talking about a well. There's lots more besides the well. Here's another one. The previous one was like a swimming pool above ground that you might have in your backyard. It has a liner, but it doesn't have monitoring wells. It's not required to get a permit. It just appears one day. So there's no protection of the groundwater, which is very critical in your area. And this one is actually put together with an earthen berm and covered with a plastic sheet. Again, no permit, no requirements to notify the public, and no monitoring wells to determine if there's a leak out the bottom. And the water lines run from these impoundments and from lakes and bring the water to the well so that the water can be mixed with the chemicals and injected down the well. So once you fracture the well and it starts flowing gas, crude oil, and condensate, then you have a production well. And all types of equipment are required on that production site. And notice the cows. This is a picture from the Eagle Ford in South Texas. Picture your home where the cows are. The issue is that these facilities will be up against your home and up against your business. And you will have little to no say-so in the siting of these wells. How would you like to have your patio where the cows are and be exposed to everything that's going on at the production site? This is an aerial view. Each one of these pads contains a number of wells. It can be from 3 to 5 to 10 to 12 wells on each pad. And the pad stretched out across the environment is needed because that's how they're going to get all the oil and all the gas out of that layer that is the shale. So picture your homes, your subdivisions, scattered among this type of environment. This is what is called a pipeline right-of-way. If you don't make a deal with the pipeline company, they take the property under eminent domain. You notice how very wide it is? It goes for many, many miles and destroys huge quantities of the environment. And then you're not allowed to build anything on top of it. So in the Fort Worth area, it's urban drilling. So when it goes into a neighborhood, there's a well, and all the neighbors go like, oh, they put it on my neighbor's property, not on mine. And then after the well comes in, they run the pipelines through everyone else's front yards and backyards and destroy the surface of that subdivision. This is what you will have as a result of this one well or many wells. These are the kind of signs they are along the pipelines. Caution, poisonous gas. Warning, petroleum pipeline, poisonous gas. This can be right next to your patio, right next to your bedroom, in your front yard, in your backyard. So it's not just one well. This is an interesting one, hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg smell. There are 3 categories here. Potential is green, and then extreme is red. And here we have the yellow flag. So you see the 3 colors, and they're flying the yellow flag. Well, your house can be right outside that fence, and that's what you're going to have to live with. Because these facilities will come in and dot the entire landscape. This is a compressor station. Compressors are used to push the liquids and the gas through pipelines. So the compressor here is used to push the material through the pipelines, and compressor stations are really bad to live next to. And I'll talk to you about the chemicals that they release into the environment, as well as the health impacts in a little bit. And there's a need for water, and you've heard a lot of discussions about where are they going to get the water. So in this case, it's a saltwater disposal well. When the oil and the gas come to the surface, they produce water from the formation, and also that flowback water from the fracking fluid, and it can either go into an injection well, or it can go into a recycling so that they can use the frack water again. And here, it goes into an injection well, and once the truck is empty, then they fill it up with aquifer water and haul it back to the rig site for another frack job, usually on the same pad, but another well. So they use the aquifer water extensively, and then they inject down through it to a deeper formation. This is what the well facility looks like, large number of tanks, and a truck hauling the produced water and flowback water into this site, and then when they come back, they deliver that fresh water to a drill site. And in these storage tanks, I use a lot of IR camera to see what you can't see with the naked eye. And these vents out of the top of storage tanks are releasing huge quantities of things like volatile organics, benzene, known humus, and cancer-causing agent. And it gets dispersed into the air where the people around this facility live. And if you look, you don't see it coming out. And if the agency comes by and doesn't have the monitoring equipment, they'll think it's all okay. But when they bring the monitoring equipment, it's quite obvious what large quantities of chemicals are coming out of those vents. And they're really open vents. And then condensate tanks. Condensates are a lot of the hydrocarbons. And in this case, the hatches were open on the top of these condensate tanks. So it was not only coming out of the vent, but it was coming out of the open hatches. Someone had gotten up, measured the quantity in the tank, and walked away and left the hatch open. So everyone in the neighborhood was breathing the condensate that was coming out of the vents as well as out of the open hatch. This is what you have to look forward to in your community. And then, because it's doing crude oil, there's a need for this storage tank. So here you see in the background 3 very large crude oil storage tanks, and then the sign tells the trucks that are hauling the crude oil which lane to hook up in so that that company will get credit for that quantity of crude oil that moved in. And then here you see where the trucks are going into those lanes and hooking up. And if you have the camera and you start looking for the emissions, there are huge quantities of emissions coming out of the back of the truck where they hook up to the connection. And then you have centralized facilities. And these are some of the worst. If you have a company like Pelican, they will put in a number of wells on one pad, and then they will put a number of pads all over the area that they've leased. And tomorrow we were supposed to have a hearing on unitization. And so everything in that unit will be pads that are producing crude oil, natural gas, and condensate. And they put in a centralized facility in the immediate area where they are producing, and they either pipe it to the centralized facility, or they truck it to the centralized facility. And here they do the treatment. They dry the natural gas, they remove the hydrogen sulfide, and they separate the condensate from the natural gas. And then they do first cuts on the petroleum that is produced from those wells. And the emissions, the odors, are just horrendous. They make all the people that live in the neighborhoods around the centralized facilities really ill. And so you'll have centralized facilities on a lease for one company, and then down the road you'll have a lease for another company, and it'll have its centralized facility. And then these are the processing plants. And again, the centralized facilities and the processing plants and all of the things we've talked to, the only thing they are required is a minor air permit or a general air permit, and there is no public notification and no opportunity for public comment. So one day, all of a sudden, you see tanks starting to be built, flares being built, and it's a centralized facility or processing facility in your neighborhood that you have absolutely no control of it siting there and of it operating there. And then these are the large processing plants, and in most cases they still are a minor source, so they don't have to public notice it. And if it's a major source, then they start piecemealing it, so they say one of those and they apply for a permit, and then the next one they apply for a second permit, so it becomes a minor source and you're never notified, and here it is in your community. And then smoking flares, the issue becomes when they produce the crude oil, they can collect it in a tank and haul it off with a truck. When they produce the gas, they either have to put it in a pipeline or they have to flare it. And when you see a flare operating like this, it's products of incomplete combustion and incomplete combustion that's going on and reducing huge quantities of chemicals into the air that will make the community ill. And this is destruction of roads. This one was actually an asphalt or a blacktop road, and you see very little of the asphalt left in the middle of the road. And the sides get eaten away and eaten away and eaten away. And in some of the Tuscaloosa, where the parish council wanted to put a fee on each driller so that they'd have the money, not to state roads, but for the roads that are maintained by the county, they'd ask for an ordinance. And the drillers would come in and say, you don't have to worry about that. We'll be glad to fix the roads. And they continue to destroy the roads and not fix them if it's not a state highway. So you have that to look forward to, potholes and roads that are just destroyed. So let's look now, after you've gotten some idea of what is coming to your community. Crude oil and natural gas drilling and production. The waste is classified as non-hazardous. The waste is generated by the exploration, development, and production of crude oil and natural gas, and they're exempt by the federal law from being regulated as hazardous. Anyone who deals with hazardous waste knows that you have to test it, and based on the testing is how you handle it, what kind of precautions you take, and also how you dispose of it. So, the oil and gas waste, if you test it, 10 to 70% of the large volume waste test hazardous, and 40 to 60% of the toxic associated waste are hazardous by analysis. But because of the federal exemption, it's dealt with as non-hazardous oil field waste. And you will hear that over and over again. It's not hazardous, it's no big deal, it's non-hazardous waste. And that's the waste that's going to be stored and transported and disposed of in your community. Along with this exemption at the federal level, the state agencies are the ones that are allowed to manage and regulate. The federal government, with a few exceptions, is not allowed to manage oil and gas drilling and production activities. So it's left to the state. When you start developing the shale plays, it consists of that horizontal portion and the hydraulic fracturing. The hydraulic fracturing fluid is used to frack each well, and it contains 60 to 160 tons of chemicals, such as the following. This goes down the well, out into the formation, and some of it comes back to the surface, and then is disposed of. It consists of things like surfactant, lauryl sulfate. It reduces the interfacial tension in the formation, so it makes it go down easier. Friction reduces, so it's polysaccharides, reduces the surface tension between the fluid and the pipe surface, so it slides down. Then we look at biocides, where you put the biocide in to inhibit the bacteria, but it doesn't sterilize it, it only pasteurizes it. So there's still a lot of bacteria. And scale inhibitors, so solvents are used as scale inhibitors. Corrosion inhibitors, such as those chemicals. Ion control, breaker, sodium chloride, and then the propping agents, either sand that props the formation open or ceramic beads. And that all looks like, oh well, maybe some of those are really hazardous. But when you look at the fracking fluid, 3 to 8 million gallons of water are used for each frac job. 3 to 8 million gallons of water. And that is one of the questions we're going to ask, is where is the water coming from? Over 750 chemicals are used in this frac fluid to make it behave in certain ways. It's the most toxic substance contained in the dispersant was 2-butoxyethanol. Those of you who were involved in the BP spill know that Corexit was used as a dispersing agent, and the toxicity in the very first formulation of Corexit was 2-butoxyethanol, which causes things like cancer, possible human cancer-causing agents, and that is the most prevalent chemical that's used in fracking fluids. It damages the spleen, the liver, and the bone marrow. So if you have bone marrow damage and you go to your doctor, is he going to ask you, do you live near a fracking facility? Do you live near a production facility? No. He's going to ask you what you do for an occupation, but he's not going to try and make that connection back to the chemicals that are in the environment in which you live. And then there's benzene, known human cancer-causing agent, causes leukemia. Flower Mound in Texas right now has an elevated concentration of benzene in the air and results in huge quantities of leukemia. So the chemicals in the fracking fluid are very, very toxic, and this is the chemicals that will be in your neighborhood. So the flowback water is the frac fluid that goes down and then fracks open the formation and comes back. But while it's down there, it picks up the contamination of naturally occurring radioactive material, radium-226. Radium-226 has a half-life of 1,620 years. It's not going anywhere. It causes cancer of the lung and cancer of the bone because it's a bone seeker. And this is going to be all over the environment as a result of fracking and the processes. Then we have the produced water, or brine, as a lot of people know. And it's volatile organics, benzene, ethylbenzene, semi-volatile organics, phenol, and toxic heavy metals, arsenic, barium, cadmium, chromium, mercury, and vanadium. And that's going to be spread around in your community. The produced water also contains sulfur. Remember the hydrogen sulfide low flag? And it contains norm, the radioactive material 226, 228, and uranium 238, and the saltwater minerals. So people will tell you it's just salt water, but there's a lot of other chemicals in addition to the salt water. And then the radium 226 again is a bone seeker and a known carcinogen, causes lung and bone cancer. This is what will be brought to your community. The shale operators admit that pollution is released into the environment as a result of shale drilling, fracturing, stimulation, and production. Spills and leaks contaminate the surface water, the groundwater, the soil, and the air. Look at that again. Spills and leaks contaminate surface water, groundwater, soil, and air. Then, the casing is surrounded by cement. So failure of the cement around the casing contaminates groundwater, surface water, soil, and air. And then the casing itself fails and contaminates groundwater, surface water, soil, and air. Is that the kind of operations you want in your community? The industry stops just short of admitting that they're contaminating groundwater from the actual fracking process, but from the drilling and the production, they're admitting they contaminate groundwater, surface water, soil, and air. Is that what you want in your community? So what are the pathways of exposure? You inhale, or it touches your skin, and you absorb it from the air emissions. Natural gas production of methane and associated hydrocarbons and condensate. Condensate and crude oil contain extremely toxic, volatile organic chemicals, benzene, known human cancer-causing agent, xylene, toluene, ethylbenzene, other probable and possible cancer-causing agents, sulfur-based compounds. Remember, this is non-hazardous waste, but it's very, very toxic. The chemicals are released into the air during production, separation, process, tank storage, and pipelines. All the things we just saw in the photographs, it's released into the environment. Emissions into the air from produced water tanks on the production site release methane, toxic volatile organic chemicals, and sulfur compounds into the air. The natural gas is frequently vented to the air when a well is completed. So when Helix completes this well, if it produces crude, they can capture that in the tank. If it produces natural gas, they're going to vent it, and hopefully they flare it, and hopefully the flare doesn't create a smoking flare. But they don't have the ability to capture it until they run pipelines. So guess what they're going to run the pipeline for first? What's the most expensive? Crude oil or natural gas? Crude oil. So that's what they're going to run a pipeline to sell it. And the gas is just extra. And when they flare gas, they do not pay royalty on that gas. They only pay royalty on what gets used. So you need to remember that, because once we move out of this area where Helix has made the agreement with the landowner and they start into your community, they're going to be coming to you to sign agreements for your property. And then you ingest in the dermal absorption, groundwater and surface water resources and soil and sediment are contaminated from spills and leaks from the pits, tanks, the rigs, the chemical storage containers, the drums, the flow lines, the pipelines, the mixing vats, the trucks, the injection wells, from road spreading and land spreading. We don't allow road spreading in Louisiana, a lot of the other states do, but we do allow land spreading. And then untreated or improperly treated produced water and flowback water are discharged from wastewater treatment plants. You have to remember that the hydraulic fracturing technology is developing quite rapidly, and it's being implemented in the field. The regulatory programs at the state level cannot keep up with the technology. A lot of it is you have to make new rules, and there's always the pushback against new rules. And then you need sufficient resources to have people go out in the field and inspect these facilities. So meanwhile, the technology is ramping up and being implemented, and the regulatory process is not keeping pace. So then let's look at some acute health impacts, short-term health impacts, as a result of living close to the shale drilling, fracturing, produced wells, the air pathway. Irritated skin, eyes, nose, throat, lungs, headaches, dizziness, lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, skin rashes, fatigue, tense and nervous. And then when we move to the second column, these are the ones that are hard for families to deal with and actually admit. Personality changes, depression, anxiety, irritability, drowsiness, weakness, muscle cramps, irregular heartbeat. Those first ones, personality change, depression, anxiety, irritability, confusion. That's really hard for a family to say, one of our family members is really having these problems. So it's hard to be able to record it, but it makes life in that family very, very, very difficult. It makes living from day to day very difficult. And then we have the chronic, the long-term exposure from living near a shale well, fracturing production, damage to the liver and kidney, lungs, nervous system, causing weakness, leukemia, aplastic anemia, changes in blood cells, impacts to the blood clotting. Again, if you go to the doctor with one of these, he's going to ask you what you do for an occupation, but he's not going to ask you how close you live to a well, or to a centralized facility or a processing facility. That will not ever come up, and so it will be hard to do the cause and effect. These are the health impacts experienced by individuals living in close proximity to shale drilling, fracturing, and production. 81% have respiratory impacts, 56% have memory loss. These are huge percentages. If you usually have something over 5%, that's a very, 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 very ill community. Feeling weak and tired, 50. Throat irritation, 50. Sinus. And you just go on and on. Recall problems. Huge numbers of the population are impacted by these things. 25% of the individuals surveyed had the following symptoms. That's 1/4. Nasal, arthritis, persistent indigestion, increased fatigue, frequent urination, extreme drowsiness, difficulty in concentrating, inability to recall numbers, ringing in the ear, severe headaches, tingling in the hands. And then let's look at what is in the water. This is based on groundwater sampling I've done as a result of shale development. Petroleum hydrocarbons, chloride, nitrate, sulfate, 2-butoxy-ethanol, remember that one is the most prevalent in the fracking fluid, bisphenol, whole host methane, fluoride, nitrite, arsenic, bisphenol A. All of these chemicals are in the water, and you depend on that water as your drinking water source, and a number of businesses in this area depend on the quality of that water for the products they manufacture and distribute. When we look at the chemicals detected in the air in association with the drilling and production, benzene, known human cancer-causing agent, carbon disulfide, chlorobenzene, diethylbenzene, just goes on and on, ethylene, formaldehyde, known human cancer-causing agent, naphthalene, polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbon, toluene, a whole host of chemicals. And then these are detected in the air in addition, xylene, ethane. And I know you're getting tired of hearing it, but remember the people who are sick want to know what chemicals and what health impacts are associated with those chemicals. So, what do we need to do for this well? This is the information that you desperately need to obtain on this well as a starter. The location of the well, we sort of know that. The number of wells that will be located on that pad. And there's an application in to the Corps of Engineers, and they're estimating the site will be 10 acres. And it's in a wetland. But you need to know how many wells will be put on that pad and their exact locations. And then how deep those wells will go down and how far out they will go. So we can see how big an area. When you look at the pad on the surface, it's just 10 acres. But if it goes out 2-3 miles in all directions around that pad, you need to know what is on the surface over that part of the well. You need to know where all the units will be on the pad, such as the compressors, the storage tanks for crude oil, condensate, and produced water, and the flowback water. Where the sweetening unit is going to be, where the separators are going to be, where the heater treater is going to be, where the flares are going to be, where the engines, where the pumps, where the treating equipment, where the loading and unloading facilities will be, where the pits and impoundments will be. Where is the water coming from for fracking? That is critical. And then, where is that wastewater going to be disposed of or recycling? All that has a huge impact as we start with just the first well in your community. And then, what are the haul roads? Remember what that road looked like that just had a little bit of asphalt in the middle? Which haul roads will they be using for the water, for the equipment, for the fracking fluids that they're going to be hauling in? Because suddenly you're going to find it's just not one well in that location. And then the location of the pipelines. So you're sitting there on the perimeter of this piece of property, and suddenly when you start asking about the pipelines, it may be going through your yard. And where are the flow lines? So if you just say pipelines, you're missing the flow lines. And the locations of all the lines that will be used to transport product and transport water to the site and from the site. When you have that information, it's going to give you a whole different perspective of what this one well will do to your community. And then remember back to all those units I showed you that are necessary for that one well to be able to function. And then you need to establish background before that well comes in. You need to test groundwater, and you need to test it for volatiles, heavy metals, fluoride, and radioactivity. You need to test the air for criteria pollutants and volatile organics. You need to establish the health of the community before the well goes in. Establishing that background level is critical. We don't want to sit here in 2 years and talk about all of the environmental and human health impacts and say, we wish we would have done background before this started. I work a lot in Pelican, Wyoming, and we didn't do background. And the groundwater is severely contaminated. People's wells are contaminated. They have to raise the window in their bathroom and turn on the vent fan when they take a shower because there's such high volatiles. And yet the industry's arguing, oh, it was already there, it's not us. So if we don't have background in Pavilion, we know what it was like before, and we know now what it's like after. So you need that background information, so when we have a meeting in a year or two, you can come here and say, this is what it was before, and this is what we're going through now. So let's look at what shared development has resulted in. Human health impacts to a large number of individuals living and working in the area of the shale development. Large quantities of environmental damage and disruption. State regulatory programs that are not adequate to regulate and control the rapidly developing shale technologies being implemented within the individual states. State regulatory programs that lack sufficient personnel to inspect, monitor, and enforce the existing regulations. I'm a member of the Board of Earthworks, and we performed a study on enforcement in a number of states, including Colorado, Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and New Mexico. And the results demonstrated that enforcement is severely lacking. So you can have the best set of regulations in the world, and if they're not enforced, they don't exist. And then local government has the authority in some cases to regulate the siting of oil and gas wells, compressor stations, tank batteries. States are attempting to take the local government authorities away. So what are the things the local government authority can do? You can have comprehensive zoning, or you can have setback requirements for some of the units from, say, a hospital or a school or homes, or you can have a moratorium. But there are things that can be done at the local level. In addition, I have here a number of studies. I have a peer-reviewed journal article from New Solutions in 2013, and it's based on health surveys and testing of the groundwater and the air in communities in Pennsylvania, and the chemicals in the water and the air, and their associated health impacts match the health impacts documented by the community. So I'm going to have one copy up here, and anyone who wants copies, you can put down your name and we'll get you a copy. The second one is the Eagle Ford Shale, a monitoring program I did in a number of the counties in the Eagle Ford Shale. Remember, it's southwest of San Antonio, near the Mexican border, and huge amounts of environmental and human health damage in that area. And if anyone wants to take a tour, one of the counties is Corns County. It has the largest quantity of oil being produced of any county in Texas. And it's amazing to just ride down the road and see all the units that have disrupted the lives of the people. And then I have a reckless endangerment report that we put out, again as evaluations in the Eagle Ford Shale. And then I have gas patch roulette, which is based on work in Pennsylvania in the gas area. So I will stop here. I have a lot of examples of what it's like out in the field when you report to the agency and the agency doesn't come out in a timely manner. But I'll stop now and let the next speaker go, and then hopefully I'll be able to answer questions when we're finished. Thank you.